This podcast is sponsored by A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family-owned and operated. By Hyde Park Care Pharmacy. Experience the difference an independent pharmacy can make for you and your loved ones. Hyde Park Care Pharmacy offers personalized care, short wait time, very competitive pricing, easy transfer of your prescription, and much more. And by Molly Maid. During these times of COVID-19, it has never been more important to keep your family safe. With the Healthy Home Cleaning System, Molly Maid London is here to help. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. Today, we welcome Associate Professor of English at Oklahoma Baptist University, Editor-in-Chief of Christ and Pop Culture, and author of numerous books, Dr. Alan Noble. We discuss politics and truth, his book Disruptive Witness, Speaking Truth in a Distracted Age, and preview his upcoming book, You Are Not Your Own, Belonging to a God in an Inhuman World.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whenever and wherever you may be, we welcome you back to another edition of the Vickers Crossing podcast. The Vickers Crossing is a virtual space where faith intersects with the public square. And my name is Rob Henderson. And that guy down there is
I'm Reverend Kevy, and this is Guy Lafleur, Jean Belleville, Maurice Richard, the seat from the Montreal Forum. I got my Habs jersey on. I'm Kevin George from St. Aidan's Anglican Church. I'm glad to be here today.
I think someone's having a grand old day after what happened last night.
Amen. I think that entrance is much deserved after what's been going on here with our hockey teams over the last 10 days or so.
Ian's team was supposed to win.
I'm not surprised that they lost, though, which is kind of unfortunate. My name is Ian. I'm a singer-songwriter, producer, creative person, and
sad Leaf fan today.
Sad Leaf fan.
Yeah.
Moment of silence.
So Kevy, in case anybody doesn't know, why all the love for the Montreal Canadiens today?
Well, there was a playoff series, a best of 7, and the Maple Leafs were first in the North Division, 18 points, we were reminded, ahead of the 4th place team they were playing, which was Les Canadiens. And they had a 7-game series, best of 4. I was told they'd be out in 4, they'd be out in 5, they'd be out in 6. Well, they came to 7. They weren't out in any of them. And they came back from being down 3-1 to what I'm told is the best team in Canada. So I just feel like celebrating today. And I wore the blue retro reverse jersey they had out this year, just as a tip of the hat to the Blue Leaf fans.
There you go. All right.
Was that a pun for blue Leaf fans?
Yeah, very blue.
They're very blue today. I don't know. Some of them are still in their rooms, I think.
Who we got coming up today, Robbie?
So we've got a great guest on the program. We're going to be welcoming in Alan Noble, Associate Professor of English at Oklahoma Baptist University, also Editor-in-Chief of Christ and Pop Culture, and author of the wonderful book, Disruptive Witness, Speaking Truth in a Distracted Age. And we're going to talk about his upcoming book, which is coming out later this fall, called You Are Your Own. So Alan will be joining us in a moment.
Yeah, he's also known as Orville.
Orville Allen,
but he doesn't go by Orville. You're gonna like this guy. He's a good guy. Listen, before we go very far today, and we're having a little bit of fun here, but this has not been a fun week in this country, and I want to do our land acknowledgement, and then a word at the end of that. The Vickers Crossing acknowledges that our podcast is recorded on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenni-Weapuck, and Attawandaron peoples, on the lands connected with the London Township and Somber Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. This land continues to be home to diverse and indigenous peoples, including First Nation, Métis, and Inuit, whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors to our society. As no doubt many of you know, this week the news came out that with a search that had been ongoing, the discovery of at least 215 bodies of children on the property of a residential school in Kamloops, British Columbia, has sort of rocked the nation, or at least it should. It's not a shock because we've known these things. And we'll remember Archbishop Mark MacDonald, who was on this podcast, talked about one of the most sort of bizarre things that he learned when he first became a national bishop was being toured around the residential schools and being brought out to see the cemeteries. You know, most schools have playgrounds, not cemeteries. And, the Missing Children's Commission of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has documented that there's at least 4,100 kids who didn't come home from residential schooling. We acknowledge this every fall with the Orange Shirt Day and all these sort of gestures we make. But at the end of the day, we really have a lot of work to do in this country. And it begins, I think, with every single Canadian reading the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. If we're tweeting or Facebooking or expressing outrage, that's all great. But none of it is as great as actually knowing what that commission has asked for us to do and demanding it of our politicians and writing our MPs and being present at demonstrations and being activist and being present. Because if we want to truly be allies, we need to actually hear these stories, painful as they are, and take action. So I just thought perhaps before we go on to our bit of fun today and hearing about our sponsors and getting into a conversation about, our fun stories about who's lying and who's not, it will be appropriate for us to take a moment, be reflective, be quiet, and offer this prayer. God, who came into the world as a child, we bring before you in deep grief the children who did not survive residential schools. Continue to hold them closely in the safety, comfort, and everlasting love which you desire for all creation. Hear again our cries of sorrow and lament for our participation in a system that allowed the deaths to happen. Forgive us. Holy Spirit, in the unimaginable pain of this loss, when all words fail, hear and hold our groans too deep for words as we see and honor the anguish of families left without the life, love, and laughter each child represents. Be present with us in the myriad of emotions that the release of these names will bring: sadness, anger, relief, confusion, fear. Guard also the hearts and minds of the survivors as they are faced again with memories of their own trauma and own suffering as these stories are brought to the fore. Jesus, who showed us how love is meant to live in the world, call us again out of denial and into truth, out of despair and into hope. Spur us to action in the places where systems of injustice prevail. Provoke us to speak out against racism, discrimination, climate injustice, and all that stands between us and the good. Just beautiful life that you designed for us together. Be our strength when we are weak, and courage when we are afraid, and our light when we are in dark places. Hear our prayer, God of all, in the name of your Son, the reconciler of all things. Amen. And our hearts go out to all of those who struggle through this time.
Good. Thank you, Kevin. Important to do that. And as we continue with our podcast today, we want to say hello and thank you to our sponsors here on the Vickers Crossing. We've got three wonderful sponsors that are so supportive of what we do. Hello and thank you to A. Millard George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London, Middlesex, both family owned and operated. And many thanks to Dave Mullen and the staff at A. Millard George today.
And we want to give a shout out to Carol Basada, who is very close to having a baby. Carol Basada, Hyde Park Care Pharmacy, locally owned, locally operated, locally loved. Get your prescriptions from Hyde Park Care Pharmacy today. Get on in there and she'll get you off at a big box operation and loved up like you've never been loved before.
And last but certainly not least, we want to say a special thank you to Molly Maid. Make her home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. And special thanks to Trisha Lister for that one. Call them up. You got a child. You just don't have time to clean up after, just
Mm-mm.
Molly Maid will be there, give you a hand. No
You're
worries.
good to go.
How old does a child have to be before you stop calling Molly Maid?
How old are you, Kevin?
Well played.
Burn!
Well played.
Burn!
You got him.
I'm 50. Thank you very much. Nicely played, sir, if I could say
Nicely
so
done.
myself.
Edit that and put it on a loop.
Yeah, that is beautiful.
There we go.
And how old are you? You old fart.
Okay, guys, it's time to, if I may quote the classic 1980s Matthew Broderick flick, War Games. Do you want to play a game?
I want to play a game.
Want to
play
play
a
a game,
game.
guys? It's a game that we like to call.
It's not a lie if you believe it.
So it's not a lie if you believe it is a mantra of ours, as well as George Costanza.
Oh, yeah.
And so one of us is going to tell a story. I think Ian's doing that today. And Kevin and I are going to have to try to figure out if Ian is lying or not. And if he is lying and he believes it, then it's really
Is it
not
a lie? Is it really truly a lie then? We don't.
Well, why don't you take a guess?
I'll have
yeah.
to guess. Okay. Well, what are you going to tell us, Ian?
Well, as you know,
Yes.
I'm a very musical person growing up all of the time. You know,
He's so musical that even when he toots, it comes out in harmony.
I'm gonna put that on my Instagram bio.
There you go.
Anyway, so I was in a choir when I was around 10 years old, and the choir director had some ins with a couple of people that he knew, and it just so happened that the choir that I was in, we got to record some choir vocals for a Rush album, which was the Clockwork Angels album, which they recorded and released. I think it was 2012.
Well,
Yes.
if you were
Wow.
10.
I was 10. So they recorded them when I was around 10 years old, and then they released it in 2012.
Oh,
And
so you
I
were-
got to sing.
So you're on
background
a.
choir
What you're telling me
vocals.
is you're on a
You're on a-
Rush album.
Yeah.
You are really living in the limelight.
Oh,
So-
absolutely. Yeah.
So it's you and Neil Peart.
No, it's the choir that I was in as background vocals for one of their songs.
I don't know, Rob. What do you think of this?
I don't know. I have a tough time believing that because every time we bring up music, when we were doing our little music thing back back in the day, and we were playing clips from some of our favorite bands, Ian would never know what they were.
No.
So Rush is a little bit of a stretch. So I'm going to say that Ian is just making up a story here. It's not true.
You don't think I'm a huge Rush fan?
No, you don't. You don't like Rush. You're not a Rush.
I'm
guy.
okay. So you say he's lying. He's making this up. Yeah. I'm gonna go with he is lying. He's lying.
He's lying. Two lies, Ian.
Two
What do you think?
lies.
Yeah, you're right. There's no way I could have pulled that off.
No way. But it was good. It did have some
It had potential.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
actually never in a choir when I was 10. Actually,
So
it was a
basically,
double lie.
you're just lying your guts out over there.
That was a big
a
one.
little bit.
Yeah.
I don't think I was in a choir when I was younger.
Well, you know what? It doesn't matter if you believe it. It's
that's-
true.
Yeah,
If you
exactly.
believe
Yeah.
See, if you had said you did some backing vocals for Anne Murray, I would have given you that.
I would have believed that.
Ah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spread your tiny wings and fly
And fly
away, and bring the snow back with you where it came from on that day.
Oh boy, now I'm scared. All right, guys, that's it's not a lie if you believe it. And believe it or not, Alan Noble is here. So we're going to
Alan
bring
Noble.
him in to the Vickers Crossing and have our little chat with Alan here.
What a noble concept.
And here he is, Alan Noble, joining us today on the Vickers Crossing. Alan, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Great. Thank
Excellent.
you.
It's
I'm
good to
excited
have
to
you
be
here.
here.
Good. And you're in wet and soggy Oklahoma, you tell us.
That's right. Wet and soggy, Shawnee, Oklahoma. Hopefully no tornadoes.
Hey,
So if I get sucked into a vortex,
No, we don't want that.
we'll have it recorded.
we will
So
have
that's
it
nice.
recorded. That and there's no screaming children, so just keep the tornadoes to a minimum. We started this. Alan was concerned about whether or not we could hear screaming children, but if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see that he has the most impressive microphone I have ever seen. So there are no screaming children. It's just Alan. So.
Well, I don't have any of these multi-layered contraptions to hold my mic. I just have an old school
Oh,
this
yeah.
is a mic back
Oh,
from when I
yeah.
did music. You know, you just have a mic. and a stand. Yeah, I don't got one of those robot
Fancy
arms.
desk clamps.
I
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
feel like Dr. Johnny Fever on WKRP Cincinnati. Right?
Yeah, I'm not that cool.
Yeah, no, me either. Believe me. All right, listen, let's get started. I wanted to start by chatting a little bit about the state of politics in America. One of our favorite
Fun.
sports besides hockey is watching American politics up here in Canada. It's wow. You folks have just come off a few years of a presidency that was just a tad chaotic. We've joked with some others here that it's we sort of look at it like, you know, we had a neighbor across the street, very nice, very kind, everything was going good. And then one day he moved out and then this guy came in and it's been a shit show ever since. And it was like, what is going on? And it was the police are bound to show up eventually. I mean, eventually something, and they never came. I mean, eventually, like there was like a mob that came in and fortified him. Like it was craziness. Anyway, in the lead up to the last election, look, you wrote in Public Discourse, you make the case that Christian Witness demands that Christians defend truth and reject the former president. I'll read a little excerpt from that article, and then I have a question for you on the other side. Okay. Alan writes, I worry that we have a mistaken vision of political ends. For the world, there is only one standard for judging a political event or movement: success. Did we retain power? Did we win? For the Christian, these are not the most important questions. Christ calls us to long suffering. Sometimes that means losing rather than condoning the spirit of the city. When Christians refuse to vote for candidates who are manifestly unfit for office, it's not an act of hopelessness or a failure to love our neighbors. Our hope for America is the same as our hope for the world, that the one who died for us will make all things new, and that the work of making new is unimaginable to us, given our absurdly divided and deceptive society. I can't imagine how America could ever repent and pursue righteous justice and a common good. We can't even talk to one another. Thankfully, I'm not responsible for coming up with a plan to save America, and neither are you. My duty is to glorify God in the fallen city I live in, and that includes seeking justice even when I can't humbly see how justice will ever be served, how racism in America can ever end, or how we can live together in peace with neighbors who find our beliefs abhorrent. But Jonah could not imagine Nineveh repenting. The disciples could not imagine Christ rising from the dead. And I cannot imagine why God would forgive me. Thank God that God's providence is in no way constrained by my imagination. My task is to be faithful. That is why I cannot support or condone an administration like Donald Trump's that makes a mockery of truth and engenders an epistemological chaos for personal benefit. Now, look, as we all know, he lost. Well, I think he lost. There's some debate in America, apparently. I heard this morning that he's telling people that he will be reinstated in August.
Yeah.
So we can all look forward to that.
That's great.
Thankfully, he lost. President Joe Biden has, I don't know why it says he has been Edward Lee, because that's not what I really mean when I type that. But he is.
I assumed.
You assume? Okay. He's been very openly, is what that's supposed to say, about very open about his faith, and he's often quoting scripture, quoting hymns, talking about what his parents taught him. We're over 100 days in now. Is America any closer, Alan, to talking to one another, like you speak of, to coming together? How would you rate the president's first 100 days, I guess, particularly as it relates to the point you make here, which is about defending the truth? Because I think one of the real casualties of the last presidency was objective truth and people's willingness to be duped into anything.
That's right. Yeah. And first of all, I want to say I agree with my words that I wrote in that article.
You wrote
it's
good
interesting,
words, buddy.
It's interesting to when you hear things that you wrote, you're like, oh,
I wrote that
guy. He's right. I think he's onto something. So that's nice.
Son of a gun. He's a smart guy down there.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's so one of the things that inspired that article was, what you just mentioned, which is this idea of truth. Of truth, of the possibility of absolute truth, there being truth that we can know and communicate. Right. Now it's limited by our fallen nature, but we still can communicate some truths. It's possible to acknowledge there are objective truths in the world. And I had, I was homeschooled, so I grew up in very conservative evangelical circles, and objective truth, absolute truth. These were just things I heard over and over. The message was like, the people out there, the secular people, they don't care about absolute truth. They're relativists, but we do. This is part of our identity, is we believe in objective truth, and that's part of our biblical worldview. And I still believe a version of that, not quite so neat and tidy, but I still believe a version of that. And what I tried to do with this article is point out that if you are socially conservative as me, and you believe there is a value in objective truth, then there's a problem having this president who intentionally, systematically, over and over undermines. I mean, he is a postmodern president. He's a profoundly postmodern president. Yes. And so that was the argument there. And it's important to note that what Trump brought about was an acceleration of forces that were already moving. Right. So we already had problems with the media being able to accurately convey information. We already had a lot of skepticism towards people in authority. Americans, that's just our nature, is that we're skeptical towards authority figures. We always want to revolt. We're still fighting the American Revolution. So those forces were already there. Social media was already there. Conspiracy theories were already there. But what Trump did, he really did accelerate things. And I think that's important, because one of the pushbacks that I received over the last 4 years in criticizing the president was that, well, look, Alan, this has always been a problem. Politicians have always lied. The media has always been deceptive. I mean, this is just the way it is. And I want to say, okay, well, yes, but there are degrees. Surely we can say that there is a difference in degree, and eventually differences in degree become differences in kind. If something is extreme enough, you got to say, well, this is its own category. This isn't the same thing as we were talking about before. So all that to say, what Trump is accelerate these divisions, the epistemological crisis that existed prior to him. And I think by getting Biden into office, what we've done is we've slowed down that process. But I don't think that we've seen that's right. I don't think we've seen a reversal yet. He could have been that president, but he turned out to be basically who we thought he was going to be. It was someone who lied the acceptable number of times that we accept American presidents to lie, exaggerated to the acceptable amount. And so I think that as far as the question, are we seeing healing happen yet? I'm not seeing that. But I do think we are in a better place by slowing that process down. Now, there are other policies that he's implementing that I would say, no, those aren't putting us in a better place. But as far as that question of truth, I'd say we are better than the counterfactual.
Right. So I listen, if it makes you feel any better, the politicians lie here in Canada too.
What?
Yeah. Oh, no, it's true. Oh, did you just say A?
That was too cold.
They just say, oh, no. Listen here, buddy. We're hot as hell here today. But the thing that I just thought about as you were talking about this business, though, with the acceptable amount of lying, right?
Yeah.
So there's a difference between, you can keep your healthcare plan, or whatever it was that they're all upset about with Biden or with Obama. Yeah. And here's a chart of the hurricane, and here is where here's where you see how it reached all the way up to Alabama here. Yeah. I mean, it looks like a Sharpie, but it's really not. It's from the experts behind the desk, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Like, it just seemed absurd, to be honest. Like, for us watching, it's like, how does anybody believe this stuff?
It was, and it is, but we, if you think about it as an extension of reality TV, that it's not all that absurd, right? And that's what his presidency is, right? So it has the veneer of reality, but if you know people who worked in reality TV, behind the scenes cameramen or something, they'll tell you like, there's so much manipulation going on. It's scripted. It's scripted. And so can you believe your eyes? No, you can't believe your eyes. You have to believe. And that's the scary thing to me, is that when we despair in politics so much that we just agree that facts are unknowable or uncommunicable or
Right.
irrelevant, and all we have left is power. And that's terrifying. And I do think that quite a few people on the right continue to hold that position.
And what's shocking about it to me is, or scary, I guess, is just the way that sort of nationalism and everything that's ripe in it has been adopted by Christianity. Like it's, that's the part that's so disheartening for me. Like I just, we heard so much from the evangelical church over the years about, morality and family and values and all that stuff. And it's like, it's all out the window. It's like, none of it matters, right? It's just really scary, to be honest. I mean, how quickly people can just forget who they are.
Yeah.
Well, Alan, we want to talk about your book and introduce that to our listeners today. We want to talk about Disruptive Witness is the title of the book. And we'll start with the introduction. In the introduction of the book, you point to Matthew, 13th chapter, and the very well-known parable of the sower and the seed that I think we're all quite familiar with. And you make the point that that before the action of Christ's parable begins, as he's telling this, you make the point that the sower in the parable has already been to this field. He has worked it maybe for days, plowing the ground, pulling weeds, moving rocks. It's hard work and it's important work, and it's already been done. And in laying out the framework for your book, you write this. I want to share with our listeners. You write, to understand the contemporary challenge of bearing witness to the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ, we need to consider our way of life in this distracted age and what effect it has on our ability to reflect, to contemplate, and respond to conviction. We will explore what it means to live in a secular age and how this compounds the effects of distraction to create a deep and largely unknowledgeable barrier to belief for most people. There are no easy answers to the problems created by our contemporary condition, but by changing our personal habits, recovering church practices that convey God's holiness, and rethinking how we participate in culture, we can offer a disruptive witness that will help people to see the world anew as created by a living and sustaining God. We'll get into habits, practices, culture in a bit, but can we start by having you talk a little bit about this first section of your book, about this contemporary condition as we're in right now, because we certainly live in a world, it's not going to surprise anybody to hear that we live in a world of constant distraction. Can you say more about this?
Where did I put my phone?
Yeah, where's my phone?
What are
Can
you guys
talk a little bit
talking
more about this contemporary condition and how we, that moves into bearing witness as we're called to do?
So my fear, and one of the fears that that inspired this book, is that it's not only possible, but fairly common for evangelicals to share their faith with someone, and they leave that conversation feeling like, okay, I've done what I was trained to do. I've done what I was supposed to do. And they perceive this as, I just shared the gospel. I just shared what Christ did, this living God did for this person. But the other person does not perceive it as that kind of a conversation. And then I think can take place for two major barriers, I think, to really hearing that. And one is distraction, because frankly, our society inclines us away from deep thinking and reflection and meditation and contemplation, and especially things that make us feel bad. We just don't want to deal with them. And society gives us lots of coping mechanisms so that we don't have to deal with them. I can imagine in a scenario like that, where you go to lunch with someone and you share the gospel with them, and there's a moment where it actually gets under their skin, and maybe they feel a little uncomfortable, and they leave that conversation and they immediately pull out their phone, right? And there's sometimes, like when I pick up my phone, I can actually feel like psychologically, like I feel soothed, right? So like when things like that happen, I think it's easier for people to distance themselves from the questions that are being raised. The other barrier is the barrier of secularism. And that's, and I'm working with the French Canadian, philosopher Charles Taylor,
C'est bon.
who who argues that secularism is not, what I was taught as a kid, which is secularism is those weirdos over there, those heathens over there.
Those people.
Those people,
the other people.
Right?
Yeah.
And he argues that actually we're pretty much all secular in a number of different ways. And one of them is that we that Christianity becomes only one of many viable options. And he says increasingly a harder one to accept. And I recently had a conversation with someone who talked about Christianity as an option that they were interested in. And this was someone raised in the church.
Interesting.
And that was, that was really, you don't like to see examples of your argument lived out in front of you. Like you actually would like it to not be true.
Damn it, I was right.
Because it's alarming, right?
Yes.
Because you recognize, okay, Charles Taylor was right. Many people in the church have adopted secular perspectives. They see Christianity as a lifestyle option, and particularly a middle-class white American lifestyle option. And it feels appropriate if you fit into those categories. One of the many problems with that is if you view Christianity in that way, when your deeply held preferences and desires come in conflict with what you perceive Christianity to be, you're just going to jettison it because you're going to say, this doesn't feel right. This feels opposed to how I perceive myself in the world. Anyway, so secularism, I think, creates another barrier. So we're having that lunch conversation and I tell them about Christ, but they hear this as me pitching to them a better way of living. They hear it as, a pitch like essential oils or CrossFit or a political program or activism or something like this, right? Where it's here's a better way to live. So they come away with it thinking, well, that's another option. I'm glad it's good for Alan. I'm going to stick to my weight loss plan. That's been good for me and my mental health, but good for Alan, right? And so I think the argument of the book is that we can't just go into these conversations assuming that our words will be perceived the way that we communicate them. In fact, we should assume that's not going to happen. Right. And we have to dig the ground. We have to present the faith as something disruptive, as something different than what people expect.
Right. And what I like about what you write in there is that, I mean, there are those who want to scream at the clouds and say, oh, social media, the distractions, make it all stop. I want to exit this world. But I mean, I think the point that you're making is that it won't do for us to just sort of do that. It's not going away.
No.
Right?
No, it's not. No, it's not. And it's not just social media, right?
No,
I mean, there are all kinds of, if you drive down the freeway, there are billboards that are distracting you. The podcasts are not yours, but
not ours.
Podcasts. No, yours is great.
Ours is good.
Distracting you. I mean, there's just,
the bump you're going to get out of this
media.
on the next book is just like,
That'd be great.
I just want to tell you right now, like you're going to get this big Canadian bump and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, those 3 Canadians.
Because I never got the Canadian bump with the last book.
Oh no, we're going to work on that here.
That's what I would love to get is the Canadian. I was talking to my agent. He said, Alan, you need to get the Canadian bump.
Get the Canadian bump. Go call the Vickers.
I got some people I know.
Listen, that's very good. Another friend of the podcast is Jamie Smith, James K. Smith, and you quote him a few times in the book. We were excited to have Jamie on here last year, and his work relates largely to habit and what we love and how that reflects who we are and where we place our efforts. It's incredible work. You make the case that the best strategy for addressing our society's condition is to offer a disruptive witness at every level of life. On the personal level, you write, we need to cultivate habits of contemplation and presence that help us to accept the wonder and grandeur of existence and examine our assumptions about meaning and transcendence. This is a call to, for me, when I read that, it's a call to disruptive habitus. You rightly suggest that adopting practices that push back against our distracted secular age is a continual process, and it will take different forms for different people and different cultural contexts. What is important to take away from this is that we have agency. And I really love this, that we're not merely the products of our culture. I love this because I think we are often given to despair and given to throwing our hands up and saying, well, there's nothing we can do about it. This is the container we're in. This is what we're birthed into. So this is who we are. The Christian faith, though, gives us resources to challenge the distractions and the secularisms in our own lives. I mean, challenge might not be the right word, but you know what I mean, to work in and amongst that, which naturally provides that disruptive witness to those around us. So I wonder if you can tell our audience more about what these habits look like. I mean, you use some very concrete examples in the book, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, and I'm glad you mentioned that last part, that this can take lots of different forms. This is one of the challenging things with the book, and one of the things that I think many readers found frustrating is that there are innumerable implications for this. And I had to give some concrete examples, but there literally are examples that could go on forever. So some of the most basic ones that I talk about are gratitude. I think that cultivating habits of gratitude is a way of pushing back against both distraction and secularism, because one of the things that secularism really depends upon is this idea of self-sufficiency, so that we either as a human race or as individuals are self-sufficient. We can justify ourselves, we can provide for ourselves. When I have a meal on the table, this is a meal that I have earned, I have prepared, I have bought, I get to consume without any sense of gratitude. And so Christianity would say, no, actually, all of this, all good things are good gifts from God. Yes. And well, if you live in this environment that's telling you, no, if you have good food on your table, that's because you worked hard and you deserve it.
You're the man.
Well, you're going to have to push back. You're going to have to cultivate habits that are going to stand out, and they're not going to become natural to you. The example I like to give is that my great-grandparents worked as farmers in Iowa. And I like to think that when they sat down to say grace, that there would be an immediacy to their conception of what they were doing that is very difficult for me to work up. Right? Because they would understand, oh, wow, God literally provided the rain and the sun and these things, these forces of nature, so that we have food to eat. Whereas me, I'm like, well, I earned the money and then I bought the stuff that magically appeared in my supermarket.
I drove to Kroger's.
That's it. No, it's mine. So I think cultivating habits like that, I think are really important. But even on the level of evangelism, or just, that's such a loaded term, but bearing witness to the faith. Yeah. I think being very intentional about how we do that. So, for example, where are we talking to people? Are we talking to them in places that are going to invite them to be contemplative, or are they going to be spaces that invite them to be distracted? Like, what are we doing with our smartphones and watches when we're having these conversations? Are we modeling? Are we inviting them to spend time thinking or not? And even just those very practical things, I think, can make a big difference.
And I think just to buttonhole that, I guess the other the reason I really appreciate the fact that you highlight the contextual stuff is because in our current condition and climate as well, with the necessary conversation about white supremacy in the church and in our institutions, systemic racism, what Black, Indigenous, and persons of color are facing, the ways that people are able to engage this will vary immensely, as you say. Yeah. So, I mean, using some concrete examples I found in the book very useful. And I think that the fact that you mentioned that there are others is critically important, because what we've all come to know, and certainly in this last year, with so many different opportunities to break open the conversation, is there's a lot for us to learn from one another. And that's the other benefit of the diversity, in a way, is, I mean, that's a different conversation in secularism. If we can honor those places where others are doing this sort of work that may be new to us.
Yeah. And it's definitely the case that different cultures, at least in America, different cultures are experiencing secularism in different ways. So people who are immigrants from Central and South America, they tend to have they've been less affected by secularism. They are more likely, I think, to believe in spiritual forces. That's less difficult for them to accept. subsequent generations of those immigrants will probably gravitate toward what I would think of as sort of mainstream, dominant American culture, which is what I wrote the book about. Also, I think the Black church in America is often an exception. They're able to not be as deeply affected by secularism often, and I think it's because of their unique experience of suffering in America. I think that persecution and suffering sort of forces you to rely or to recognize the importance of a savior. For example, whereas if you're fairly comfortable, it's easier to feel like I am self-sufficient. Like I did earn this, I am okay. So yeah, so there's lots of cultural diversity. But again, even in African-American culture in America, I think, there is a pull toward the dominant culture, and the experience of secularism, I think, will continue unless something changes to be the dominant one.
Right. Keeping on that theme then of church practices a bit, church practices are so critical too when it comes to disruptive witness. And you offer great examples in your book about how the kind of sort of institutional practices are out there that we actually need to say goodbye to, as well as practices to pick up.
I love this part.
To be effective in disruptive witness. And one of the most striking examples of how the institutional church has adopted habits from living in the secular age is Vacation Bible School, which we're all quite familiar with up here. Believe me, they're all over, right?
You guys have vacations?
Yeah.
And
Bible schools to fit them.
Alan, once in a while we stop drawing maple syrup and cutting our igloos.
We stop building air glues, riding our polar bears.
To go out and have a vacation Bible school.
Is that what you do for vacation then?
No, we ride a moose.
All right. We change it up.
We like to change it up.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead,
good.
Rob.
Fair.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry. We love this shit.
So you write in the book, I want to share this with our listeners. You're right. Here we are trying to teach our children that they are fearfully and wonderfully made by a great creator God who made and sustains all things by his powerful word. So we spend hundreds of dollars to mediate that creation and suck every bit of wonder and mystery and beauty out of it that we possibly can. And why? Because culturally, it's just what we do. Yeah. We're real good at it. Yeah. So I'd love it if you could share with our listeners that little story or bit about the Vacation Bible School that you witnessed and why it was so indicative of the problem with many of our church practices.
I just got to say before you do, I laughed, and I thought, this is because I've witnessed these things, man. And I'm like, and I've been a priest in a parish where it's expected to happen. And you go into the hall and you watch this going on and you're like, oh.
So when I first wrote this book, the second half was a disaster. And because of the reason I mentioned earlier, which is that it's difficult to talk about concrete examples. There are so many implications. And so the first draft was too, 60,000 feet in the air. It was too abstract. And so I had to, it was summer and I was revising this draft, rewriting basically the half of the book. And my kids were in Vacation Bible School down the street at a church that many of my friends serve at. So it was a little bit awkward. I felt bad because, and I tried to express in there that the people doing this are doing it out of great intention. They are serving, they are loving, they are sharing the gospel, they are doing good work. But we have to be able to say, like, you can be doing good work and there are still some things that we can do to improve, that you can unintentionally convey ideas that are harmful, even though, overall, okay. I mean, I always think back to Paul, right? Who says, while he's in jail and others are preaching out of selfish ambition. And he's like, yeah, I praise God that they're preaching. But he still says they're preaching out of selfish ambition. So like he can get that criticism in there. He can say like, this isn't what you're supposed to be doing, but God can work through that. Yeah. So So that was a little awkward because
Yeah.
I did feel like I sat down. It was the parent. So there's like one session of the vacation Bible school where parents are invited to watch what their kids have been doing all week. And I'm just sitting with my wife and like grabbing her hand, like, what have we done? What is going on here?
Look to deprogram our kids when we bring them
That's
home.
right.
Yeah.
Because it was this whole thing about creation, and they were inside a building and they were watching animated videos about animals and God's creation. So it was highly mediated. Yeah. The decorations in the sanctuary and in the halls were gears. So it was, I mentioned in the book, it's like literally the image of the watchmaker God of deism. So like that we want to get away from, like, this is the image unintentionally. So, but this church, and I think a lot of churches actually, there's a lot of cultural pressure to do exactly this, right? Because parents, they expect a program that's high quality, right? They want something that is put together, has all these things. So you buy this package and you feel like, I've got to.
It's consuming.
Yeah, it is. And there's a pressure to compete. I think over the pandemic, as a lot of churches went online, there was a similar pressure to produce high quality church services instead of just throwing up a camera and, and streaming.
Getting it done. Yeah.
Right? Yep.
So, I mean, you had an owl there. There was an owl and there was all this stuff.
That's right. I forgot.
You're going to love the owl.
Yes. I don't even remember yeah. So there was this cartoon owl. Oh, that's right. And they gave them these little dongles. I don't know what you would call them. Yeah. That you could scan with your iPad.
Right.
And you had this app, and then like you could play with the character, or it would get like bonus content. Basically, it was bonus content.
Bonus content.
And what killed me, what absolutely killed me, was this was about the wonder of creation. Like God is a creator God. So like the irony there was just so. I think if the theme had been something else, it wouldn't have been so painful. But that was just like, it's right there. This is what we're doing. We are mediating everything. So here's a practice that is actually distancing us from the evidence of God as creator, because traditionally the church has said two books of scripture, the Bible and the book of nature. And so, this was about that other book of Revelation, but it was distracting kids from it, which is just bizarre, but it doesn't feel bizarre.
You hate to have to sit the kids around the supper table and say, okay, now we need to talk about what happened today. Well, it may have been wildly entertaining.
That's right.
We're going to talk about the nature of creation.
Oh gosh.
Anyway.
In writing about disruptive cultural practices, you talk about the importance of story, which I think is really great. And by stories, you don't just mean like novels and books. You mean like TV shows and songs and albums and plays, commercials, video games, all of that. And I love that because, like, as a singer-songwriter myself, the importance of stories is just super compelling. In your book, you write, stories have a unique ability to tap into and evoke our desires for the transcendent. Excuse me. They reveal and accentuate cross pressures, and they appeal to us as whole persons through aesthetics. Well-made stories by Christians can open people to the possibility of a reality beyond the
imminent frame.
Imminent.
There you go.
Words.
You're welcome.
Imminent frame. Thank you very much.
Not a problem. Not a problem, buddy.
But even well-made stories by non-Christians can use allegories of transcendence that can awaken us to our latent desire for the transcendent. When Christians interpret, critique, and discuss stories with our neighbors, we can model a contemplative approach that promotes self-reflection and honesty, inviting empathy rather than promoting the detached rationalism of the buffered self, that's a sentence. Wow. We can lean into the cross pressures produced by these stories. We can offer interpretations that affirm and account for our longings for forms of beauty, goodness, order, and love that find their being beyond the imminent frame.
Boom.
You nailed it, buddy. You nailed it the second time. It's like,
man.
everybody out there listening, give Ian a big round of applause on the word imminent. Okay, got it now.
Finally, it was that.
Go ahead, Ian. Is there a question? Is there a question after all this?
Yes. Can you share more about how we can interact with the culture around us in such a way and provide more of a disruptive witness that you talk about?
So I'm a little spoiled teaching literature because I get to do this almost every day with students who, most of them would identify as Christian of some kind, but as we've talked about earlier, a lot of the church is secularized. They have at least secular assumptions. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not Christian, but it does mean that they have these assumptions that I think make their faith extremely vulnerable. And so one of the things that I get to do with talking about books is I get to invite students into stories. And what good stories can do is that they can get under your skin, that they can move you and force you to think about things that maybe make you uncomfortable. The example I gave in the book is Cormac McCarthy's The Road, but there are lots of books you could choose. I think The Great Gatsby is a great example for many young people who share with Jay Gatsby this experience of a deep longing to be with the right person. This this feeling that if I could just be with this one person, I would feel my existence justified, right? And so they can experience that, they can identify with it, and then we can talk about, well, where does this longing come from? How does it make sense? And can we get that kind of existential justification through romantic relationships? Is that a possibility? Well, it literally kills Jay Gatsby. So that's a bad sign.
Yeah, that's not good.
So that's in the negative column.
Not good.
So
And listen, if you haven't read the
side.
book, sorry for the spoiler.
Spoiler
Yeah.
alert. Hold on.
It's 100 plus years old or something.
You should have read it by now, is all
Should've.
I'm saying. If you
That's
haven't
all I
read it
got.
by now,
right.
screw you.
You're missing out.
Yeah. So I think, and this is just coming out of my personal experience. I mean, I talk about a student who, followed me after class and talked to me because we read some Hemingway, and he said, you know what, I share a lot of Hemingway's atheism and I don't like it. I as he's unsatisfied with it in this novel, I am unsatisfied with it. And I don't know what to do about that. And I've had experiences like that many times where a student says, gosh, sometimes even, again, people raised in the church, I really resonate with this secular character written by this secular author. And what that often reveals is that they've adopted some secular perspectives about, let's say, identity or the immanent frame, right? They perceive this world as the only world that really exists, right? Or they perceive Christianity as an option, and they're trying to find the right option. So I think, things like book clubs, talking about stories, sharing stories, seeing films together and talking to people about them are ways of doing that. The trick is that there's a way of perceiving story, songs, films, reading books, visual arts, whatever. There are ways of perceiving it that put our guard down, and then there's a way of doing it that is often highly performative, right? So, like when you leave a movie and you think, I've got these 5 scenes that I'm going to complain about, or like I'm going to, you're thinking about how you're going to review it on a website or something. And so when you're thinking about it in this mediated way, right? That's a different thing entirely. And I think when we do that, we actually distance ourselves from the story. We feel very objective, and it's not under our skin. But when a story really gets you and maybe even bothers you and it haunts you, I think those are opportunities. I think these are sort of opportunities built into our culture where we can disrupt people and their conceptions of faith.
I like that. We had our last guest on here was a guy named John Marsh, who's a longtime friend of mine, and he's a big fan of John Caputo, and he talks about this sort of haunting, right? This notion of a presence of something which haunts us and lures us and seduces. Like, it's really, to me, that organic reality where you're so moved by something. Again, it's about habitus, right? It's if you come out of that movie and there's an organic expressed response to others, and you do it in such a way that it speaks to who you are. It's not mechanical. It's not industrial. It's not those gears that were at the VBS, right? It's right. It's because relationships. It's because love. It's because possibility in God and all these things that could happen if we engage in a conversation with a mind open for the possibility of what God could be doing, even in places where we least expect it, right? Like a movie theater. So
that's right.
We're coming to the end, so I just wanted to take a moment and talk about your upcoming book or new book, which is called "You Are Not Your Own: Belonging to God in an Inhuman World." And this book is born out of the first question of the Heidelberg Catechism. And the question is, what is your only comfort in life and death? And the answer is that I am not my own, but belong, body and soul, in life and in death, to my faithful Savior, Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. So the fundamental lie of modernity is that we are our own. We've talked about that a couple of times today. You can tend that until we see that this life for what it is and work to uproot it from our culture and replant a conception of human beings as not being our own, but belonging to God. Most of our efforts at improving the world will be a glorified Band-Aid. And you aim to kind of recontextualize the argument that much of our modern world makes us ill. Individualism, consumerism certainly has ill effect on us. And your aim in this is to do this not as someone outside society looking at it, but as someone who actually lives within society and that's affected by the same problems, tempted by the same desires, burdened by the same anxieties. So can you tell us more about your upcoming work and maybe when we can see it?
So I think the date is October 12th or 11th or about there. It feels like forever from now because it's been done for a little while, but I've got to make some final edits. In some ways, this came out of the first book. So in the first book, I do talk a lot about this habit we have of being distracted. And I explore what Pascal and many of others have discussed, which is the human heart's desire to not look at the human heart, essentially. And part of the argument in that first book is that, well, we have the infrastructure, we have the technology, the support system to be distracted in ways that Pascal could never be distracted, right? And so, I mean, this is an old problem, but as we mentioned earlier, sometimes problems are the same kind. Once the degree gets so great, you got to think this is a different category. This is something different. So that's the argument I made there. But as I reflected on it, as I talked to people about this book, it's not that I disagreed with it, but it seemed to me that I didn't give a full account of our desire to distract ourselves. And it seemed to me that part of what's going on in distraction is coping, not necessarily avoiding life's big questions, but sometimes just coping with life. And so this led me to think quite a bit about the experience of living in the contemporary world. And the argument I make in the book is that the contemporary world is inhuman, and its structures, its systems are designed not for humans as we actually are, as designed by God, made by God, but some other anthropology, some other conception of being human. And as a natural result of that, if you're in an environment that is not made for you, if you think about a zoo animal in an environment that's not their natural environment, they're going to get sick. They're gonna be, and that happens in zoos, and it happens to us here in Oklahoma. A couple of years ago, we passed legalized marijuana for medicinal use, and that's just been. I mean, it's just been wide open. But one of the striking things has been when I'm driving down the highway, I'll see these billboards that are almost unapologetically saying, "Life is terrible. Escape."
Smoke weed.
Smoke weed. Yeah. And I think to myself, okay, this has got to be a sign of deep societal decay. When we're not even pretending that things are okay, we're
wide open about it now. We're all set.
Life is miserable. You cannot deal with it unless you're on something. So it's either got to be some psychiatric medication or it's got to be weed. But it's something, right? And so I'm trying to give an account of that disorder and localize it with the idea, the cultural idea that we are our own and belong to ourselves. And I argue that from that, all kinds of disorder brings.
I don't know if you've heard of the other not French Canadian, Al Roxburgh, not Alan Roxburgh. Al Roxburgh writes a lot of stuff about missional church. And he was a guest on here a little while ago as well. And he's got a new book out, and it's called Leadership, God's Agency, and Disruptions. And I thought of you when I was reading the book. Its subtitle is Confronting Modernity's Wager. And I'd recommend it to you reading it, because when I was reading your Disruptions book, I thought of Alan's book. Al is a good guy. He's out west in BC. But you two make a lot of similar arguments and a lot of sense in the sense of knowing that, it's sort of like Hauerwas years ago, who talked about us as resident aliens, right? Like it's that notion that somehow or another, if we're going to be true to living our baptismal covenants or living to the gospel, however that looks, we have to reflect something different than a series of billboards that says life is miserable. Yeah. Never mind there is no agency. Get a pound of weed and a case of beer. Yeah, unzip your pants and sit in the backyard till the whole show's over. There's got to be something more than that. And modernity's wager has always been that we're in control and that we've got it all figured out. Well, here we are now saying, oh, sorry, you're all sick and sad and everything else, and you need pills and weed and everything. And then that's not, let me be very quick to say, because I can see the emails, that people shouldn't receive medications for proper depression and all that stuff. Right. Be very clear. Also the weed, the whole thing. However, I think Alan's point, and Al Roxburgh makes a similar point, is right on mark, that we have bought into a narrative which is not our own. And that, to me, is what makes your work and others so critically important for those of us following in the way of Jesus today. How do we recapture the narrative and live by that and bear witness to something different in a world which feels a loss of agency?
And I just want to say, a lot of us Allens are doing.
You Allens are amazing.
You're top notch.
Great work.
That's it.
This is why I don't go by Orville, because I want to associate with the Allens.
You want to be
Alan
with the
Jacobs.
Allens. Yeah, well, yeah. How about
I've gotten many messages
Alan
from people
Iverson,
like
Alan Rickman.
Alan Iverson. Who else have we got, boys? We got Alan Thicke, great Canadian. Alan Thicke.
Yeah, another great Canadian.
Yeah, he's not.
He's not up there with the Allens.
I don't know that he's with the other Allens.
He's not up with the rest of the
When we
Allens?
have our convention, he doesn't
He's
show
not
up.
there.
Yeah.
Hey, how about the Meerkats? You remember the Meerkats on YouTube that were so big years ago? Alan, Steve.
No. You know what? I've heard about it exactly in this context, where people are like, "Oh, your name's Alan."
Oh yeah.
One time I watched a YouTube video,
and everybody was called Alan.
We're going to let you go so you can look that up. But hey, Alan Noble, thank you for coming on the Vickers Crossing. We really do appreciate the time. Alan's books are Disruptive Witness, Speaking Truth in a Distracted Age, and his upcoming book, look for it in October, You Are Not Your Own. Alan, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks again to Alan. And really want to point out to everybody that Alan's book and many of the books and authors that we've talked to here in the Vickers Crossing, you can find those on our website. Click books. Yep. Click the tab and you'll find out more. And
you'll be able to pre-order the upcoming book as well as buy this book. They'll both be on there.
Yeah.
That's great. Good. Well, thanks, guys. That was a great opportunity to get together again. And again, we want to thank our sponsors, as always. First to A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation, London, Middlesex, both family owned and operated. To Hyde Park Care Pharmacy, locally owned, locally operated, locally loved. And to Molly Maid, make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today.
Quick programming note. I meant to mention this in the introduction. Chandra Prescott-Weinstein was to be a guest on the podcast last week. I'm sure many of you were pining for us last week because you didn't get a new episode. We were supposed to be with her, but due to some scheduling conflicts on our end, we were unable to record. But I am in touch with her agent, and she does intend to record with us for a special episode, a bonus episode that we'll record later in June and release perhaps early in July.
Perfect. So look forward to that. All right. For the Vickers Crossing, I'm Rob Henderson.
Ole, 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 ole. I'm Kevin George.
And my name is Ian. And wow.
And Kevin, remember to always look both ways
before you cross the street.
Thank you for listening. Our hosts are Kevin George and Rob Henderson. Our producer and composer is myself, Ian, with original artwork done by Elizabeth Dodman. If you have any questions or want to know where to find us, tweet us at Vickers Crossing or find us on Facebook at The Vickers Crossing. If you have any other questions about anything heard on this podcast, leave us a comment or look in the description to find out more. Thanks!